I just spoke a moment ago with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse about Justice Samuel Alito and these flags. He seems to think it is pretty clear that there needs to be a discussion about recusal for Justice Alito. Where do you stand?
There's no circumstance where Justice Samuel Alito should be permitted to preside with respect to any case that has to do with the January 6th violent insurrection. He absolutely should recuse himself. He has disqualified himself in terms of either the appearance of impartiality or actual impartiality.
So how do you get him to reconsider? How do you get the Chief Justice to get him to even consider this?
This is part of the challenge that we confront with the runaway Supreme Court that appears to want to conduct itself as if the judiciary is above the law. Now, for years, members of Congress in both the House and the Senate have indicated that it's time for the Supreme Court to have an ethical code of conduct that is enforceable. Last year, Chief Justice Roberts did implement a code of conduct, but it appears to be voluntary and is being ignored. And so as a result of that, the first opportunity that we have in the Congress, I believe we need to have a real conversation about a legislative effort to implement an ethical code of conduct on the Supreme Court that is enforceable. They are the only branch of government currently that can operate with impunity. Congress has an ethical code of conduct enforceable under law. The executive branch has an ethical code of conduct enforceable under law. We've got to get the MAGA extremists on the Supreme Court under control.
So just to be clear, when we're talking about these flags, one of them was the upside-down American flag. It was flown outside of his Virginia home in January 2021 after the insurrection, while the court was considering a case regarding the election. Justice Alito says his wife was the one that flew it and that it was in a dispute, done in a dispute with one of the neighbors. The other flag was the Appeal to Heaven flag. It's a flag of a pine tree, and that's been co-opted by Stop the Steelers as well, the religious portion of the Stop the Steelers. There's been no comment about this flag. This was flown outside of his New Jersey, vacation home multiple times, according to the New York Times, in 2023. These are the two flags at question here. When Republican senators are asked about this, they don't see that they're a big deal. They'll say that this is overblown in the media. Do you see any innocent explanation for the flying of these two flags at two separate homes during two separate periods?
Do not see any non-nefarious or innocent explanation. And if there is one, we haven't heard it from Supreme Court Justice Alito. It's not been forthcoming. I think his only response was to try and throw his wife under the bus, which was extraordinary in and of itself for anyone to do, let alone a Supreme Court justice, who, by the way, is having to deal with pending cases before the Supreme Court that involve the insurrectionist in chief, Donald Trump, involve people who violently assaulted the Capitol as part of the effort to undermine the peaceful transfer of power for the first time in American history. And that is why this is a serious issue. Part of the challenge that we confront at this moment is that the extreme MAGA Republican majority in the House of Representatives has zero interest in exercising any oversight authority over the out-of-control members of the Supreme Court, which is one of the things that will be before the American people on the ballot in November.
If the Democrats retake control of the House, if the American public puts Democrats in control of the House, and say the American public allows Democrats to maintain control of the Senate, say the American public also allows Joe Biden to keep the White House, would you plan on doing something regarding Justice Samuel Alito, potentially trying to impeach him?
Well, let's not put the cart before the horse. The first step would be to make sure that we engage in aggressive oversight to get an understanding of what's happening, why it's happening, and how we can stop this extremist behavior from ever happening again. The challenge right now is that even the Senate Democrats, though they are in the majority, has the inability, or does not have the ability, I should say, to enforce subpoenas and try to ascertain and obtain information because Republicans in the Senate have the ability to block it because there is a 60-vote threshold with respect to subpoena enforceability. And of course, under Chairman Jim Jordan and the chair of the Oversight Committee, and we see what a mess oversight has been throughout the entirety of this Congress, they have zero interest in trying to rehabilitate the credibility of the Supreme Court. We're going to have to step into this situation.
It's not just Justice Alito. It's also Justice Thomas that has serious questions surrounding him regarding billionaire funding and lavish vacations, what he's taken from people who have arguments in front of the Supreme Court. He's also taken positions recently regarding our institutions. In the overturning of Roe v. Wade, he brought up Obergefell and gay marriage and suggested that he'd want to take another look at that. There's also now questions about him potentially wanting to take a look at Brown v. Board of Education. What are your feelings about Justice Clarence Thomas?
Well, Justice Clarence Thomas has long lost his credibility in terms of an impartial figure or someone who was interested in the principles of liberty and justice for all, or equal protection under the law. It's important for the American people to understand that if Roe v. Wade can fall, anything can fall. Social Security itself can fall. Medicare can fall. The Affordable Care Act can fall. Democracy can fall. Brown v. Board of Education can fall, as Justice Thomas made clear in his concurring observation and opinion yesterday. So everything we care about is going to be on the ballot in November, including getting the federal judiciary into a place where it can actually administer the law and make decisions in a fair and impartial fashion, not lead an ideological effort to jam their right-wing views down the throats of the American people.
Leader Jeffries, if Justice Alito does not recuse himself and he's part of the court that rules on former President Trump's immunity case, which is set to come out any day now, and say that it gets kicked down to the lower courts and it's Justice Chutkan that now has to go through where the presidential immunity lies, is that going, in your opinion, to degrade the confidence in the court?
Well, the court has done a lot over the last several years to degrade public confidence in the institution. And, that's quite unfortunate because we need a fair and impartial judicial branch as part of our constitutional architecture. And a handful of these MAGA extremists who are on the Supreme Court have pushed things too far in an extreme direction. I think we just have to continue to encourage the American people that at the end of the day, who they elect as president, who they elect into the United States Senate will help determine the future fate of the United States Supreme Court. And based on the view that the public lacks confidence in the Supreme Court, I'm hopeful that that will be a factor in November when people go to the polls.